For more than 40 years, People Incorporated has been an integral part of the greater Fall River community. Creative, collaborative, and invested in the region, we have consistently developed supports to make our community a better place to live. Dedicated to a better future for all our citizens, we are People on the Move. Hi folks, I'm Bob Canuel, President and CEO of People Incorporated, welcoming you to another episode of People on the Move. For those of you in the community listening in today who may have a family member or a friend with an intellectual or cognitive disability, I think you're going to truly enjoy today's show. Our guest today is Leo Sarkissian, who is the Executive Director of the ARC of Massachusetts. Leo, welcome to the show. Good to see you again.
You know, I just want to say how pleased I am to be not only with you personally because of our long-term relationship, but about how strongly I feel about People Inc. and the work you do in the community.
Pleasure to have you here, and I know we don't always get a chance to have you come down here directly, and I know a lot of the people that are going to be listening today have a lot of questions about, you know, some of the services and the direction that Department of Developmental Services is heading. And hopefully we can answer some of those questions for people today. So before we get started, though, I think it'd be helpful to our listening audience if you could tell us a little bit about your background and what you've done at the ARC of Massachusetts.
Sure, great. It's a pleasure to do it. You know, historically, I've worked in the field of disabilities now for over 30 years. It's 35 years. But when I started out, I had a cousin with a developmental disability. And, you know, one of the things we talked about earlier was sharing with the public the old terms. You know, we used to use the terms mental retardation, and of course there's some terms like cerebral palsy and autism that are still current, and we switched to intellectual, cognitive, and developmental disabilities because it's just much less stigmatizing. And of course, as adults grew up, the word retardation became a put down, and a lot of young families and adults said, hey, we shouldn't be using that word anymore. So my background really was personal at first, and then decided to get involved in this field. I just did an internship and loved it. And I have a background in clinical social work, graduate degree from the University of Chicago, came back here and sort of grew up with the community service system, like you did. And so for the last 20 years, I've been leading the ARC of Massachusetts. It's the premier advocacy organization for people with disabilities, and specifically, much of the time focused on intellectual and developmental disabilities. And along with what you said, the DDS budget, mass health budget, sometimes generic things like transportation, which is such a big issue for so many people. Transitional assistance sometimes is an issue for folks that are pretty capable who can't make it without transitional assistance funding. But so we're right there at the forefront. And then with the ARC of the United States, we're involved on some of the federal issues. So when the fiscal cliff negotiations started, we were very concerned because Medicaid is a huge funder for community services, things we take for granted, residences, family support. So that's, you know, sort of my learning over the years has really been helpful for that.
I think a lot of people don't really understand the full extent of the services that are provided in Massachusetts to people with intellectual disabilities as well as their family members. It's a huge, ever-shifting set of resources that are out there. And we'll talk in a little bit about, you know, some of the things that are coming up in this year's budget. But you know, you talked, Leo, a little bit about how over the course of many years we have become a little bit more sensitive to the impact that names have. But the ARC of Massachusetts and the National ARC have gone through a sort of a similar. Can you talk a little bit about that?
When we started in the 50s, we were the Association for Retarded Children. Why? Because the baby boom generation from the war, a lot of kids, there was nothing for the kids. I mean, basically, the first goal of the families was getting together in people's homes. What can we do for our kids? And there was the ARC, and there was, you know, United Cerebral Palsy and Easter Seals, and the ARC's the only one left that's got this network of local, state, national chapters. But the whole theme of that point, those advocacy organizations, was let's try to make our life the same for our kids with disabilities as with other kids. So it was really an evolution. So the ARC went from children, though, as the kids grew older, to citizens. And then in the 90s, early 90s, we realized the stigmatizing name issue. And nationally, they had a huge debate over what to change the name to. realizing we didn't have an Exxon budget.
Yeah.
From Esso to Exxon, they spent, imagine a minor name change, how much money they spent. We went with keeping the ARC, but getting rid of the acronym and saying that there was a national organization
Yeah.
for individuals with, and at that point, intellectual, developmental, and cognitive disabilities. The ARC of Massachusetts took a similar tone, but kept it to cognitive and developmental. And then finally now, we're the ARC. That stayed the same, but a new brand focus with a swoosh and a lovely yellow. So we realize we don't have big bucks.
Yeah.
So we have to use that kind of thing, a really noticeable brand, achieved with us. And that's really the focus now for the next 5 years strategically. Because there's so many people, like you say, that don't even know what's out there and what's possible.
It's, I mean, we do a lot of our effort locally in the greater Fall River area is advocacy and education. And it's always, it's an ongoing process to try to educate people as to what we do, why we do,
Right.
Why community is so important to people. It's the big challenge, I think, that we will continue to
this
have.
TV work that you do and the radio work is so important. And then, of course, you guys have some great services on the ground. You're
Yeah.
trying to knit together Fall River and the surrounding area. And I think having the family support services you have, community-based, you're a large organization, but at the same time you're reaching out locally. I think that's awesome. And it's great to see the city supporting that as
Yeah,
well.
the city's been great,
Yeah.
and
And the legislators who you and I were talking about earlier, Pat Haddad.
Yep.
Yeah, who's awesome state rep, who's been in a leadership position now in the House. And then Michael Rodricks, Senator Rodricks, who's chair of the Committee on Children, Families, and People with Disabilities.
Yeah, we've been really fortunate that the local legislative delegation has been incredibly supportive to us for years. And Michael in particular, now that he's a state senator and
Yeah.
is chairing
Yeah,
one of the more important committees on Beacon Hill, relative to our services, it's been of enormous help and support to us. So we're fortunate that we have that. Let's talk a little bit about, as the executive director of the ARC of Massachusetts, there are a number of other ARC organizations that have an affiliation, partnership,
Yep.
if you will, with you folks. Explain to the audience a little bit how many are involved, how
Sure.
that works,
Sure,
and,
so
and
there's-
how an organization like us, who are not
Yep.
an ARC, fit into that.
sure. So there's 17 chapters of the ARC. And there's really two ways an organization can be connected to us. And one is through affiliation, formal affiliation. That means it's a high threshold thing because you're basically paying dues to the state and national organization. But what you're doing is you're saying long term, you're going to underwrite this advocacy, which we could talk about later, some of the achievements. But then there's another way for People Link and other organizations to be involved, and that's to say, okay, we're going to be an agency sponsor of your work because we believe in what you're doing. And by the way, we want to stay informed as much as possible of what's going on. So we have that relationship with you guys, and it's a really important piece of it too because we raise all our money every year.
Yeah.
It's 100% fundraise. There's a few little minor state grants we've gotten. One of them's federally, really, money that could disappear tomorrow, and that's only been for a few years. And anything else we get, because we sometimes go to litigation,
Yeah.
to demand services for people. The waiting list case being a great example with 2,400 people. We're able to get over $100 million in funding. The state, it's not likely that they'd want to, always fund us.
Yeah.
So it's really important that relationship. Then finally, even if organizations don't participate, there's information from our website, there's information we share, but it's really important to work together because families learn about us through the agencies that serve them locally.
Yeah.
We want your families to learn about us. That's important.
Yeah, you mentioned the waiting list. The Boulay settlement was of huge help to family members. And for us personally, it created an opportunity for us to develop some additional residential supportive services that, allowed us to address a great need in our community, which was those people who were aging, those
Sure.
people who had more intense medical needs.
Yeah.
Could you just kind of talk a little bit about that settlement and what
Yeah,
your
sure.
role was in that?
So that's a great example too of why, fundraising is important, because believe it or not, for us to get up to speed on that, and again, it's a civil rights issue, right? You had people at home with families totally being ignored for services. It's almost like you're either in or you're out, So it cost us somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000 in just over the 4 years of setting, getting ready
Yeah.
for it, interviews with families. Luckily, we got grants and gifts from people to help underwrite that, and then we had pro bono legal help
Yeah.
from Hill and Barlow at the time. Now
Yep,
Neil
yep.
McTrick is at Ogletree Deacons. I just want to put in a plug for him because he was an awesome lawyer. We fortunate to have somebody that was unbelievable. And we have good public, by the way, public rights attorneys through Center for Public Representation and Disability Law Center that were on the Rowland suit. But on Boulay, really what it was about was we thought, 3,000 or more people
Yeah.
who had no way to get services. And it was both residential and employment. We wanted family support to be part of it too. We just couldn't find enough families to make up, that in the case. And so we went to court. The lawyer, Neil McTrick, said, you know what, we're going to go with a summary judgment, so we won't have a long trial. And it was very good that he did that, because we had a mini recession a year later.
Yeah, yeah.
So the bottom line was they decreed initially that, yeah, this was wrong, the way the state was doing it.
Yep.
You can't bring somebody in and just say, no, no go.
Highly
And-
successful advocacy
Yeah.
that not only involved, the ARC of Massachusetts, but a couple of other advocacy groups that we'll talk about in a bit. But on the heels of that, you became involved in and successfully was a part of engineering the Rowland settlement.
Yes, yeah. And then actually, there was 2 Rowland settlements, right? The
Yeah,
second
right.
one, you're talking about the second one, and that was Center for Public Representation and Disability Law Center that we worked with. And really important, that has probably helped 1,700 people. So combined, we're talking about 4,200 people. And then annually,
Yeah.
we were talking earlier about this, annually, before even those settlements, we tried legislatively to get help. And that included salary reserve.
Yeah.
We would call it the campaign for access and excellence, because
Yeah.
excellence was about the salary reserve and cost of living,
Yeah.
because we can't have community workers working at poverty wages. That's really not right, These folks have demanding jobs. But more importantly, we want them to be bridge builders to the community.
Yeah.
And because we want people with disabilities, again, from a civil rights perspective, to be involved in their communities. So to me, the salary reserve, cost of living, those things, when we were
Yeah.
doing years of those campaigns, but we went to court. It was easier to go to court. Well, not easier, it was still hard, but we just felt access was easier. We wanted to do
Yeah.
actually something on the staffing. And then other groups got involved to work on that, the
Yeah.
trade association. So we stepped back and said, go ahead, we'll support you in that.
Yeah, and again, a highly successful end product, the Rowland settlement. Over the past several years, we've created, I want to say 4 or 5
Oh.
new residential programs that were a part of that settlement.
That's great.
But you mentioned salary reserve, and one of the biggest issues we have, as Leo mentioned, is the fact that many of the people who work in the private vendor system, which People Incorporated, like many other organizations, is a part of, do not get regular salary increases. The mechanism that the state uses is called the Salary Reserve Program, and it's been a spotty
Yep.
accumulation of years where we've not gotten anything and years where we've gotten something. And now we find ourselves on the cusp of Chapter 257, which is a huge advocacy effort by yourself and a number of
Sure.
other people to finally address the rate structure that has been problematic for us in terms of being able to pay
Sure.
an equitable raise. Let's talk a little bit about that issue.
So for the public to understand, here are people working, full-time jobs, and the last time was appropriate, and by the way, these program services might have been set up 20 years ago. So imagine cost of living 20 years ago versus today. And the only new monies you had coming in really were for a place like People Inc. or any organization was salary reserve dollars. Meanwhile, rents were going up, or utilities were going up. Oh my God, healthcare premiums were
Yep.
spiraling and are spiraling out of control. And so what do? You end up making, okay, how much less can our package be without hurting our staff? What can we do creatively that we don't hurt our staff, with these packages? So 257, the goal of that, and again, we were supportive of the trades to go ahead and take the lead on that, was to say, let's establish a rate that's fixed, that can be reviewed every 2 years, like hospitals, like
Yeah.
doctors, like, let's be real here, folks. And again, if you had a son or daughter in a program, you would want staff to be remunerated, and one thing people should know is this system of care that's community-based through primarily nonprofits is unbelievably cost efficient.
Yeah.
So, but you don't want to make it so cost efficient that you're risking quality because people aren't getting paid. So 257,
point.
yeah, set up the rates, and the first rates were day programs and then employment services. And now we're in the middle of fixing something. Again, remember, no rate increases in 1987. Today's 2013. We have a residential system out there that's big.
Yeah.
That's the big one this year, and it's going to be somewhere around $150 million to fix that problem.
Yeah.
And then from then on, it can be a much smaller amount, but the
Yeah.
bottom line is, you know, it's so important
And
to
for
do
an-
that.
For an agency like People Incorporated, that's huge because, you know, we currently have a $21 million annual budget, and more than 50% of that budget is a part of our residential service system.
Wow.
So that creates an enormous opportunity for us to be able to
Yeah.
provide a more equitable raise. And as we discussed earlier before the show started, it also gives us an opportunity to stabilize some of the areas that have been somewhat problematic. So we're all
Yeah.
eager to see whether or not that may end up becoming reality.
So in a week, I think it's in a week, right? Third week of January, Wednesday, the governor's budget will come out. I should know it off the top of my head. I think it's the 23rd. And we'll see what the governor does. We've been advocating with a trade that's in our field very strongly with the Secretary of Administration Finance, who's changing, unfortunately, as we speak.
Yeah.
But hopefully, residual memories there. We had
Yeah.
meetings only recently in December with them and with the Secretary of Health and Human Services.
And we're talking about advocacy, but you know, you guys have done a phenomenal job, but you don't work on your own. You've carved out a series of relationships and friendships and with other advocacy groups. Talk a little bit about the other groups that you typically work with.
Sure.
And how that's been helpful to us
Sure.
sort of furthering our advances.
Well, there's two types of groups. I mean, one is advocacy groups like ourselves who have, they probably don't have as many resources as us, but they've still got great grassroots relationships. And so Mass Families, Organizing for Change is a great example. Mass Advocates Standing Strong, where people with disabilities who play, you know, functionally play roles. And those are a couple of advocates for autism in Massachusetts,
Yeah.
which we host at the ARC, but which is a separate entity. So that's some examples there. And then I mentioned the law centers, which are advocacy organizations. So for example, something the public doesn't know about right now, Mass Health is considering making the financial entry level for people with disabilities the same as what's going to change because of the Affordable Care Act, and have the Massachusetts adjusted gross income instead of income in general be a factor. Well, we're working with the law groups, including, you know, Mass Law Reform and others that I didn't mention before, to figure out, is this a smart thing to do? Or will
Yeah.
this hurt, let's say if families have people with disabilities as dependents, will this hurt them in terms of qualifying for Mass Health? It's not a little thing.
No, it's
It's
huge.
behind the curtain, you know? So we reached out to financial planners in our field, and we've got they suggested an accountant who does taxes would be the best one. They got a great pro bono, he's going to do it pro bono basis. And we have a call at the end of this week or early next week with the law groups that got me involved in this and them, and we'll get on the phone together, because it would have worked for other disability groups, this change, but I was concerned. I said, hold it, you know, put on the brakes. I'm not sure what the implications are in our world. So that's a great example of working with people. And then, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and I think, you know, for the vast majority of people who look at an organization like People Incorporated, they don't understand how adversely we can be impacted by changes in state mandates or federal mandates, and without organizations like you, it would be difficult for us to remain in business.
Right. Well, you were mentioning like Boulay and Roll and how People
Yeah.
Link benefited. I would say those are, I think those are the two biggest places of new revenue, besides
Right.
turning 22 for the field and access to services in the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
So us being able to convince people, and yet people don't know who we are. Why? Because you know why? It's human nature. You know, people are raising their kids
Yep.
and responsibilities, and then agencies are sometimes juggling so many things. They don't think about, oh, hold a second, we don't keep supporting the ARC significantly. How are they going to do a new Boulay? How are they going to do, you know what I mean? It's just,
Sure.
it's so hard because you guys at People Link are stretched, trying to meet the community needs, you know, and somebody else down the street is stretched, and it's just figuring, okay, how do we do this, you know, make it work? The trade associations have also been a good partnership,
Yeah.
Bob, that ADDP for us, Developmental Disabilities Providers, we've been working with them very closely on the budget every year. Why? Because they have great relations, they are a trade group, you know, so there's things, you know, enlightened trade folks in the agency line groups like People Link say, okay, yeah, we're hearing the same thing from the advocacy group and the trade group. Thank God.
Yeah.
We're not getting two different messages.
Yeah.
You know?
It's amazing. I mean, the way you and Gary have been able to carve out a relationship that's been right on target in terms of advocating together, I
Thanks.
think is going
Thank
to be
you.
incredibly beneficial to agencies like ours, and we really do appreciate it.
Thanks. Yeah.
We talked about Chapter 257,
Yep.
which is a huge issue. But what are some of the other things
Sure.
that you folks have on your...
Stuff's happening.
Yeah.
It's you know, society, the government, we talked about the fiscal cliff.
Yeah.
Everyone was enraptured about, well, let me tell you, we're in that, okay? And it's not just that. How's the economy rebounding? Are people in work? Imagine people with disabilities, their families out of work. Imagine the people with disabilities themselves who are working, losing their jobs. Retraining that goes into it that
Yeah.
folks have to do. So there's a bunch of things that are going simultaneously. So number one, the biggest thing is if, depending upon what happens in D.C., everyone's looking at that. Some people are holding back on spending. You know, imagine if there's major changes there in hospitals and defense plans. And, you know, Massachusetts is big in both.
Yeah.
Now go to state government, say, oh, we just got killed on this, you
Yeah.
know, we need more help. Well, that could hurt. I hate to say it, we have to be very aware of that, not in an anti-way, but more protective of don't forget about us.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
like that song, was that Breakfast Club, or I don't know. But anyway,
That showed
St.
me,
Elmo's
no.
Fire, I know. But the other thing is on the federal level, what if they do something to Medicaid? That's significant. Again, people out there, Medicaid is a health program, but it's also a very important 60% of funding nationally.
The safety net.
Yes.
It's huge.
Yeah. For the group homes you mentioned, for everything, it's reimbursable federally.
Yeah.
Then we've got this demonstration project to put Medicare and Medicaid together for some people, for 115,000 people in Massachusetts. That's live right now. We're doing some educational sessions. We have to do webinar so people can understand what the choice will be around that. Then, one more thing I'll tell you and then get back to you. The law centers are looking at advocating for more Olmstead. In other words, so now here you have, this is some hard for the organizations that provide services. Here they're struggling to keep up with their mandates. There might actually be pressure to have fewer group homes or,
Right.
you know, why do you have that workshop? Yeah, I know John can't get a job, but why are you paying him less than minimum wage?
Yeah.
There might be lawsuits around that that are then going to cause havoc in a way, even though they're
Yeah.
for good reasons.
Yeah.
So we're trying to be out front, proactive
Yeah.
on that, trying to talk to people in advance. Let's think of what's realistic, what can we do, you know?
You know, you mentioned earlier, too, that the efforts on behalf of organizations like us save the state
Yep.
millions and millions of dollars. I
Right.
don't know if anybody's ever computed a fairly accurate
Right.
estimate, but I think that's sometimes lost on the public who see us getting grants and don't fully understand the nature
The
of
big
what
picture.
it is that we do, as opposed to, you know, in the old days, institutional models,
Yep.
because they were hidden from public view. We're out in the community
Right.
and a big part of it. But I don't think we can ever underestimate or fail to communicate enough the incredible cost savings the state receives by doing business with an agency
Let me
like
give you an
us.
example. I had given the Secretary of State 5 years ago, or maybe it was 7 years ago, when Deval Patrick first became governor. He was a great governor, as President Obama has been great on issues for us. And I showed them $2 billion the DDS budget would be today if we hadn't advocated for progressive things and if there weren't, on the ground, community nonprofits, versus, at that point, it was 800-something million.
Yeah.
So that was an example I gave of just what they would have been spending based on trajectories
Yep.
historically of spending on state government. That's just one example. Now you leverage money from grants.
Yep.
You can use fees.
Yeah.
You can do all kinds of smart things, you know, that allow you flexibility. In fact, again, I think the negative part of that is it's been so efficient that this government hasn't been as thoughtful and focused on cost of living and those kinds of things that you should be getting.
And that's a great point that you raised, because I think for our organization, you know, we've been fortunate that we've been successful in terms of being able to grow and utilizing our financial resources well. But, you know, 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, we started a family support center. And
Yep.
we got maybe $250,000 from DDS to put this program together. But in the period of time since we started, we've raised revenues from other organizations
Right.
to enhance what we do.
Great example.
And, you know, it's been a huge boost to the Fall River community. So You know, I can't believe the
I
time has
can't
gone
either.
as quickly as it has, Leo. You know, it's always a pleasure to talk with
Yeah,
you.
same here.
I hope that some of what we've talked about today has been informative to you. If you have any questions, please, you can certainly contact us. We'd be more than happy to try to answer them, and at some point in time we will have Leo Sarkissian come back and join us, because I think for family members out there, you can never get too much information. I want to thank you for watching People on the Move, and hope you will join us for our next show.